In Ukraine, pro-democracy campaigners are battling an authoritarian government. At least that's the way much of the media paints it. But does that bear any resemblance to reality? What's really going on in Ukraine? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to Inside Story. In Doha, I'm Adrian Finnegan. It began as a dispute over the future of Ukraine, closer European integration or not. International reporting has focused on deep divisions over the issue, and the country is reportedly split between the Russian-speaking East and the more European-looking West. But is there also a wider regional battle for influence going on? Russia is said to be trying hard to keep Ukraine under its control, while Western countries have been accused of trying to roll back Russian influence in Ukraine for years. And there's the ongoing violence on the streets of Kiev. Police tactics have been condemned by human rights groups. Protesters and journalists have been kidnapped, tortured, and even killed. But protesters camped out in Maidan Square are also accused of some acts of violence, and not much attention has been given to the anti-democratic leanings of some of those protesting. Well, on our last Inside Story, I was talking to Russia's presidential spokesman, Sergei Markov, about the Sochi Olympics. At one point, he broke away from our main topic and told me that Russia was being subjected to a propaganda attack by Western countries and that violence on the streets of Ukraine was being orchestrated by outside actors. Here's what he had to say.
I think now it is big danger that same should be organized some bloodshed on the Ukrainian streets for the same reason for the Russian. It's my real concern, and I want to ask Western politicians, as they know that such bloodshed provocation now the process of preparing on the Ukrainian streets and Ukrainian buses in Ukrainian metros. It's mostly dangerous. Situation.
Look, Ukraine is a completely different subject. We don't want to be getting into just at the moment.
No, it's not different, Sky. Now it's very much connected. You didn't got my point. You didn't got my point. I told it's exactly as provocation in South Ossetia have been organized during the Beijing Olympic Games. Same provocation could be organized. I'm sure that they're preparing in Ukraine in the time of Olympic Games.
Well, speaking of outside interference, US diplomat Victoria Nuland has been forced to apologise for a leaked phone call in which she's heard making disparaging comments about the EU while talking about Ukraine's future. The phone call was posted on YouTube with the Russian title Maidan's Puppet.
So that would be great, I think, to help glue this thing and have the UN help glue it and, the EU.
Well, US officials suspect Russian security services were involved in leaking that call, something which Nuland alluded to on Friday.
I'm obviously not going to comment on private diplomatic conversations, other than to say it was pretty impressive tradecraft. The audio was extremely clear.
So what's really going on in Ukraine? And who might or might not be interfering and why? Let's bring in our guests today. From Kiev, we're joined by Valentin Yakushik, member of the Public Humanities Council, a consultative and advisory body to the President of Ukraine. From Moscow, we're joined by Vyacheslav Matuzov, a former Russian diplomat, and from London, Michael Binnion, the foreign affairs specialist at The Times. Michael Binnion, much of the Western media paints Ukraine's troubles as a battle between good and evil, of democracy versus authoritarianism. But that's not an accurate picture, is it?
Well, it's far too simplistic. There are elements of that in certainly what we've seen on Maidan Square, but it's really a battle for the soul of Ukraine, and this is a battle that's been going on ever since the breakup of the Soviet Union. Does Ukraine look west? Does it look east? What should be the culture of Ukraine? Is it a Russian-speaking country, a Ukrainian-speaking country? What should be the political system? Should it be a presidential system or a parliamentary system? All kinds of questions questions that have been unresolved for more than 20 years, with power going backwards and forwards, with what we saw as the Orange Revolution tilting the balance towards the west of Ukraine and towards Ukrainian nationalism, and then tilting back again with the present President Yanukovych to the eastern side. Added to that, of course, there are all sorts of other elements of a battle against corruption, the fact that Ukraine hasn't got its economy really in order and hasn't had a successful run at development for some years, and the influence, I'm afraid, of some fairly shady characters, some far right-wing politicians, some mafia types, all this thrown into the mix, which leads to a pretty explosive situation.
So what's the problem, Michael, with the media's popular protests against the government and for EU integration narrative?
Well, there's nothing wrong with that, because that is certainly the motivation, and that's how the thing began. But I think various other people have been taking advantage of this situation to pursue things that are perhaps a slightly different agenda. You have among the demonstrators, among the liberals and those who would like to see closer relations with the EU, are some people who have no interest in any compromise with the president, and even if he offered them a share in power, wouldn't take it, because they have a much more right-wing agenda. And this is essentially something that is anti-Russian or anti any kind of accommodation with the Russian-speaking part of the country. And they have an agenda that is actually fairly unclear. Also, whether or not the Russians are interfering actively, there's certainly considerable efforts to try to sway the situation, both by open political blackmail from Moscow and by economic inducements. So there is a real struggle for the soul of Ukraine, which is more than just the simple narrative that we've seen so far.
Well, let's hear now from Kiev, Valentin Yakushik. Who are the protesters behind you there in Maidan Square? What do they want? What political affiliations do they have? Who is backing them, do you think?
Well, just on the eve of the event of the meeting of EU meeting in Vilnius, I was interviewed by your company, and I was telling that those who are protesting, there are a variety of people. Some of them are just ordinary anti-Russian people who in any circumstances will try to do anything possible to make hurt Russia. Some of them are real liberals and globalists, and they want to be part of the Western world. Some are naive people who want to be to have good quality of life, and who cannot even read the text of the draft of association agreement. So they look at the West as a paradise, so they want to go and live in paradise. In this case, I was saying, who wouldn't like to live the quality of life like Bill and Melinda Gates family? So a lot of them are like these. So it's shortly, but it took some periods, some stages in the development.
Valentin, do you or the government suspect that any of those people protesting are subject to outside influence or interference?
Outside influence in Ukraine always is very powerful. Ukrainian mass media is under some guidance from one part of the world or another part of the world. All Ukrainian revolutions are done with the money pumped either by local oligarch or like during the Orange Revolution, Boris Berezovsky was pumping dozens of millions of US dollars into the revolution. The same is going on now. So Ukraine is part of the globalized world. Another thing is what kind of influences me and people like me would expect the West and Russia to influence us towards a kind of balance, towards better understanding of what is behind the scenes, but it's not done by Ukrainian and world media. So all is simplistic, like in the first words which I heard in your program, as if it is fight between very good democratic Western Ukrainians and primitive undemocratic government and Eastern Ukrainians Ukrainians who do not understand the tendencies of the development.
All right. Vyacheslav Matuzov in Moscow, Russia's State Duma recently passed a resolution condemning foreign politicians for interfering in Ukraine's affairs. You heard President Putin's spokesman at the beginning of our program. What did he mean when he spoke about a Western conspiracy in Ukraine?
Well, it is not a conspiracy. It is absolutely open deal. I heard a hearing in Senate of the United States when they asked John Kerry to explain American influence on Ukrainian events, and he openly in press said $5 billion the United States allocated to support Ukrainian opposition. $1.9 billion was allocated only to training youth, to training camps, to training people for such kind of revolution. Interference, obviously, even we now hear then Victoria Nuland talk. We can. I don't care about illiteral words she used, but I care that she talk how to deal with Prime Minister, who will be Prime Minister, who will be Minister. Is it the deep business for the United States or for Ukrainians themselves? Why, in such an ugly way, they are interfered in internal affairs of independent state? Russia doesn't do this. Never.
Why?
I think that's why.
Vyacheslav,
was Yushchenko, Tymoshenko, then Yanukovych. It is people who decide, not in Washington.
Why would the US want regime change in the Ukraine? I mean, I've even heard talk of or accusations from Russia of there being a covert CIA operation underway in Ukraine aimed at bringing about regime change.
I don't think it is a CIA as a state-ruled organization, but there are a business for diplomatic action, a global corporations who are behind all these changes in the world. Arab Revolution, Orange Revolution, now events in Ukraine. I heard about George Friedman. He's an editor of Stratford. He said, and he's a CIA man. He said openly, they don't care about anything else about Ukrainians. They want to tease Russians in Ukraine. They're only for teasing, not for any policy. So I don't understand how it is law became a political standard of the United States, how low is political standard of American diplomats who are using illegal words about Europe, who are bringing to the United Nations pussy riots, those girls who are dancing with, I cannot translate into Russian even, what means pussy riots. And American ambassador in the UN are making photograph with them and told that she will join them in their next tour. That's what really scandal.
Yeah.
It is not a standard of diplomacy, of global policy. I think this standard should be higher than we watch right now in Ukraine.
Michael Binion.
I mean Western diplomacy, Western policy.
Michael Binion, put this into context for us. What are we to make of the accusation that the West is somehow fomenting and orchestrating the violence in Ukraine?
Well, I'm afraid I'm pretty skeptical of any global conspiracy, especially one as naive as we've just heard, which suggests that the West is there to try to tease Russia and that the whole aim of this is to somehow seduce Ukraine away from Russian influence. I do think there is certainly Western interest in seeing Ukraine being able to make a decision on its own. And it's certainly quite clear that Moscow has no intention of allowing Ukraine to do that. It did give Ukraine a fairly clear warning that if they were to make an association agreement with Europe, there would be severe economic consequences and that their exports would not be able to enter Russia freely. At the same time, there were also inducements that if they were to move away from Europe and towards Moscow, then there would be a clear economic benefit given. Now, I think the whole point about this is that Russia sees Ukraine still as very much something close to its own history and soul, and is terrified of the idea of Ukraine somehow moving outside its orbit of influence. Now, Ukraine is an independent country and should be free to decide for themselves. But as we've heard from your correspondent in Maidan Square, all kinds of people have all sorts of agendas there, and I'm afraid outside money is playing a part. And it is certainly true, as the colleague from Russia has said, that in the Senate we have had some fairly naive expressions of let's try and win it for the West. Well, frankly, winning it for the East or winning it for the West is poor diplomacy wherever it comes from.
Vyacheslav Matuzov, are you being naive, as Michael said? I mean, why is Russia so keen?
I'm very naive.
Why is Russia so keen to keep Ukraine within its sphere of influence?
Well, I am very naive man. When I approve Russian move, when they said to Mr. Yanukovych before Vilnius meeting of European Union, they said, please go to European Union. We don't against. We Russians want to join Europe too. It wasn't Charles de Gaulle proclaimed Europe united from Atlantic to Pacific. I think that was the real substance of Russian position. But when they said that they take Ukraine as economical part of Europe, so Russia will close all custom borders with Ukraine. Now all Ukrainian industry are working with Russian industry. All agricultural production of Ukraine, main of all, they have Russian marketing. I don't know how can we separate two states that live together. They produce aircrafts Antonov, they have constructor bureau in Kharkov, but they have some plants in Ulyanovsk, in many other Russian cities. I don't like those in Europe, in the United States, who are pressuring Ukrainian government to join without any condition, without any counting their benefits of their legs of lock, anything. So I think keep Ukrainians themselves. They decide. If they benefited from relations with Europe, please take it. But know that Russia will defend their own economical interests.
All right.
I don't think that after counting all this, Yanukovych came to the conclusion to withstand.
Let's hear
and
once
what
again.
is the pressure we are watching now?
All right,
it's a struggle against Ukraine and Russia.
Let's hear again from Valentin Yakushiku, who's in Kiev, where he's waiting patiently. It's very, very cold where he is. Valentin, what do you make of what you've heard so far? And I want to know from you whether you think these protests have the potential to spiral out of control. Could there be a split within Ukraine, some sort of civil war?
So let me start with the beginning. The initial stage, as I see it, so one of the versions is that it was staged, it was orchestrated by people from presidential administration, very close advisors to Mr. Yanukovych. And they said, okay, why don't we do some students' protests showing to Europe that we are supporting entering to Europe, and please, Europe, be a little bit more generous with us. It was first stage. Europe was not generous with the President Yanukovych. It was offering only $600 million for a long period of time. Ukraine urgently needs saving its finances, its economy, and needs much better assistance.
Valentin, would the people of Ukraine have been better off with the deal that was offered by the EU or by the deal that was offered by President Putin?
My personal view on this is that people from eastern and some parts of central Ukraine, which is deindustrialized already, where industries are destroyed, will be much better off because at some stage they will be able to leave Ukraine, work in Europe, have some more profits from cooperation with Europe. But southern and eastern Ukraine will suffer a lot. These are regions where still Soviet and post-Soviet industries are preserved, and they are functioning to a large extent to cooperation with Russia. So Europe, in a way, provoked a kind of split in Ukraine when was disregarding the interests of highly industrialized, Russian-speaking, not nationalistic regions of Ukraine. Russia was pressuring, definitely, but I cannot agree with the Russian colleague there in Moscow when he was saying that Russia was doing something illegal. No. That was not preventing, not acting against the law. Russia was saying, be careful, we are not going to pay for Ukrainian approximation to
Valentin.
Europe. Europe and Ukraine have to pay themselves.
Okay, Valentin, we're rapidly running out of time here. Michael Binion in London, we heard earlier about Victoria Nuland's obvious frustration with the EU over its policy on Ukraine. I just want to know from you whether you think the EU's efforts to woo Ukraine are related to Western military strategy.
Not at all. I think that's completely out of the question. I think one of the reasons the EU actually hasn't intervened very heavily, and here I would disagree with the colleague from Moscow, I think the Americans may have offered all kinds of help and aid to the opposition. The European Union hasn't done very much because it's very careful about not trying to deepen the split that everyone can see exists in the country, and not trying to favor just the Western nationalist Ukrainians and leave aside the interests of those in the East. And America would like a more robust approach from the EU. This is an old story. America feels the EU is shilly-shallying, not really showing any backbone, and in America these things look much more black and white, you know, goodies and baddies, them and us. And we got a touch of that kind of impatience in this outburst from the American diplomat, which I think the Russians very quickly and very obviously turned to their advantage, to great embarrassment in Washington.
Vyacheslav Matuzov, in the event that events, if events spiral out of control in Ukraine, would Russia intervene to restore security?
Never. I'm sure it is not up to Russia to intervene in any case. I think, I believe the Ukrainians themselves have a strong army, has a strong security organization, so I'm sure that they will set up the order necessary for Ukrainians, not for Russians. Russia doesn't interfere. Russian people doesn't appear in demonstrations is in support of Russian policy, but we see Victoria Nuland twice visiting Maidan. We see Catherine Ashton coming and sometimes to Kiev too. We see parliamentarians from European Union, from Baltic states are coming, inspiring. Poland deputies are having their own camp in Maidan. So, who is interfering in Ukraine? Russia or Europe? Or maybe the United States? Russia doesn't care about, but United States and European countries are trying to push Ukraine to Europe. We are not against. I'm not against. I'm with European Union. Even Russia will be joining the European Union. I'm not against. But I think that you are not violent. You are not enforce Ukraine to go what way. I was struck when I heard Nuland, Miss Nuland, they are spreading portfolio. Who will be prime minister? This is not a person that should be. This person is better. Who is Victoria Nuland? Is she God on this earth? Why she appointed prime ministers in Ukraine? That's the question. I don't care about your illiteral words they use to characterize Europeans, but I very attentively heard her words about portfolio in foreign independent state. It is impossible. It is violation of all international law and the Charter of the United Nations.
Gentlemen, I'm afraid we're out of time. We're going to have to end the discussion there. Thank you to all of you. In the cold in Kiev, Valentin Yakushik. In Moscow, Vyacheslav Matuzov, and in London, Michael Binion, the Foreign Affairs Specialist at The Times. And thank you for being with us on this edition of Inside Story. If you want to send us your feedback, please send us an email to insidestory@aljazeera.net. Thanks for watching. I'll see you again. Bye for now.